We'll start the show in just a minute, but first, a word from our premier brand sponsor, Casago, and co-sponsors Guest Ranger and Good Neighbor Tech.
Casago's founder, Steve Schwab, has been quoted as saying, "You can only be a local in one place." This simple yet profound statement is the basis of Casago's franchise model, which allows locally owned vacation rental management companies the ability to compete at a national level by leveraging the systems, software, and support and buying power of a much larger organization.
As a Casago franchisee, you have the freedom to run your business with the support of a community of like-minded professionals while leveraging the economies of scale and buying power to increase profitability and reduce operating costs.
Guest Ranger is the premier guest screening and chargeback protection solution. Leveraging AI, their tool effectively detects fraudulent activity, fake IDs, and underage guests, while also performing comprehensive dynamic background checks. With Guest Ranger, businesses can rest assured that their customers are safe and secure.
Good Neighbor Tech allows you to manage your properties remotely and intelligently, protecting your owners and your guests. Their smart Wi-Fi locks allow you to provide temporary access to home and garage from anywhere and keep track of when guests and service providers are in the property. Good Neighbor Tech provides the ability for you to collect email addresses from all guests staying in a property, not just the one who booked the reservation. Every guest who connects to the internet will see your branded welcome page and be prompted to provide their email address in order to connect to the Wi-Fi.
Visit casago.com/franchise, guestranger.com, and goodneighbortech.com for more information.
Welcome to Alex and Annie, the Real Women of Vacation Rentals. I'm Alex.
And I'm Annie.
And we are joined today with Melanie Brown, who is the Executive Director of Data Insights for Key Data. Melanie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Alex. Happy to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you here. We've been longtime fans of Key Data in both roles Annie and I currently have and previously had, and have just enjoyed working with your team over the years and getting to see your presentations at conferences too. And, not everybody gets to go to the conferences. So we thought today would be a great day to have you come in and share some of the things that you're seeing across the many markets that you monitor. But before we get started, can you give our audience just a little bit of background on who you are and what your experience has been within vacation rentals?
Yeah, so I joined the Key Data team in 2018. It was my first introduction to vacation rentals. Previously, I was doing a lot of data and analytics, helping translate that data into actionable decision-making items for people. And it's been a wild ride in the vacation rental world since 2018, and such like an interesting time to kind of join it from a tech and data perspective, as both the industry has grown, like the sophistication of those involved in the industry has grown. And so it's been really cool to be a part of. Within Key Data, my team tracks a lot of trends in the space. We do a ton of presentations, we build a ton of presentation decks, and then we write a lot of articles and blog posts about what's happening in the space to make sure that, people who are maybe not as dialed in still can have a feel for what's going on and hopefully some understanding of how to make decisions and respond to those trends.
That's a lot of stuff to deal with. I think one of the things that Alex and I have seen over the last couple of years, and we've talked to a lot of people about, is the availability of data for people to look at. And it's coming from so many great sources where, you go back pre-COVID and even leading up to COVID, there was not a lot of great sources. I mean, it was still like everything was kind of in its infancy. And so, what have you seen just in your time with Key Data in terms of the ability for managers to get that data and get good data? And do you feel like we are leaping ahead of the hotels sector on the availability or access to data?
Yeah, it's been interesting. See the availability of data grow, and then also people's ability to use and interact with that data grow. I think when I came into the industry and the role in 2018, it was very bare bones, like what's an average daily rate? Like we're not used to seeing competitive data. So suddenly people are learning about all of these different data sources, so direct versus scraped, and then how to actually use and view that data. And then as another layer on top of that, what data is worth using, what data source is best, what data do I look like? In terms of comparison to hotels, we've had a lot of catch up to do. It's also interesting to learn more about how hotel data collection works. It's so different for vacation rentals, right? Hotels, obviously, they don't have to deal with owner stays. Their units are blocked less for vacation or for like maintenance holds. And so much of it is self-reported. The hotel is sending data to a data aggregator. We've tried that a few times, and it's tough. And so having these direct integrations to the property manager's reservation systems kind of takes that middleman out of it, because they're not emailing a spreadsheet to somebody on a weekly basis. So I think now, like, we have maybe called up to a lot of the hotel performance data aggregators and are figuring out that we have to do things a little differently than the way they did things, because the industry is so fragmented.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I mean, looking at it from a destination marketing organization, Chamber of Commerce, CVB perspective, I know Key Data has made massive headway there for these organizations in the last few years. And I'm in the Myrtle Beach market, and we've always used the STR star reports. And the funny thing is, we had Mark from Boostly on our podcast last year, and the episode title was, I've got 99 problems, but STR ain't one of them. And we meant short-term rentals, but my hotel friend said, oh yeah, like I was having a problem with my star reports this week. That's so funny. Like, that's not what we're talking about. But it's got an interchangeable now, but that is one issue that many of these destinations really have had, that we use those reports, but that was not indicative of the vacation rental inventory in a market. And to your point, emailing in spreadsheets, like, gosh, I feel like that was yesterday, that is exactly what people were doing. Or, some of the scraped data was not even scraped. It was so manual that it was people going to each other's websites and checking availability and marking it down in a spreadsheet. So we've come a long ways. And I will say that I think Key Data has been the big proponent behind that lift. So we're appreciated for that.
And people are so resourceful, right? Like, they knew that data was needed, so the gap was being filled. Like, I know I've worked with Coastal Carolina University on Myrtle Beach vacation rental
that's
performance, and they're like college students out here, like, scraping the OTAs to learn about data collection. And it's so cool that those little grassroots efforts exist, and that, like, really a lot of schools, especially on the East Coast, have stepped up and plugged that gap. But it's also been fun to say, like, hey, here's the actual data, we're collecting it directly. We have these relationships with property managers in your market. Like, here's what short-term rentals are doing, because so many destinations really didn't know. And then now we have a lot of hotel chains reach out, and they're like, hey, what's happening with short-term rentals in our market? Because now they know they're the direct competition. And it's interesting, like, seasonality can be different. The booking windows are so different. And so now we're working on some partnerships where, people on the hotel side of things are looking at, okay, the vacation rentals book so much further out, their booking windows are so much longer. Can we use vacation rental booking and occupancy to help project what hotel occupancy will be 3 months from now, because of that difference in booking windows?
Yeah, and it's so smart of them to do that, because I think for the longest time we were sort of deemed the redheaded stepchild of hospitality. Like, we didn't know what we were doing because we just didn't have a lot of automation. And to your earlier point, everything was spreadsheets. And I'm in the Panama City Beach market, and I remember we went through a couple of different iterations of, like, how do we report? And it was, we would use the star data, and then we would get together in groups and say, well, does this look like what you're seeing? Does this look like what you're seeing? And then our CVB got together with the Haas Institute and was using that source. But what was interesting about that was people, to your point, self-reporting. And so we had one person in the market that was like, I'm running 90% occupancy all the time. And we were like, there's no way, like, it's not possible. But you couldn't tell on the report, but it would just skew everything to such a degree that it was throwing everybody off. And it finally came to light of who it was doing. And they were just like, look, either you report honestly or just don't participate, because it's just making everything harder for people. So to be able to get that direct source data is so helpful, because it helps all of us make better decisions, not just the operator of a vacation rental, but real estate market knows what's going on. I mean, again, for the hotels, it helps them forecast, because let's face it, hotels generally aren't going to book that far out, but they can forecast where that demand is going to be and raise their rates when they need to, and, put their rates out lower where they need to, but it helps the whole market.
Yeah. And we've it's taken some work to come in and provide structure and standardization. So, this company that's reporting 90% occupancy, well, okay, what was going into that calculation? Were they including owner nights?
Oh no, they were just lying. They were just
lying.
Yeah, they were just flat out lying.
Yeah, you don't always know. Are you just like trying to seem like you're the best operator in town, or are you just like not good at data and you're miscalculating it? So it's been fun to come in with all of the, I mean, it's hard, right? Our integration and developers spend so much time on that to make sure we're pulling the right thing from these reservation systems and aggregating it correctly and doing like a really fair apples to apples comparison across all of these companies.
Yeah. One thing that so I was recently in the channel manager side, and prior to that OTA, and then prior vacation rental, so a little bit of everything, and kind of understood the different conversations to be had. But when I was at the channel manager, I would deal with property managers who would say like, do I need a dynamic pricing tool? And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, if you have more than like 50 units, you definitely want to do it, especially if they're in one market. But one of the things that I think that there was a misnomer about for a while is that you either had to get a dynamic pricing tool or key data, but that the two didn't work together.
And they're not the same.
At all. Right. And they're not, but I found the partners that used both of them were making the best decisions that they could possibly make, and probably better than anybody, because they had so much like real source data from their PMS, and then the scrape data from their pricing tool. And so I feel like they're, maybe it's not as prevalent as it used to be, but there was definitely a conversation of you only needed one, but you didn't need both. So how do you see key data in relation to those pricing tools?
Yeah, we still run into it on a daily basis. Our sales team is like, people still think that they just need a dynamic pricing tool and not key data. We talked early on about like the level of sophistication with data in the industry and how that's grown. We've seen this in other industries too, where people are like, oh, I have data, like all my decisions need to be based on a model or the hardcore data. The reality is like so many of these destinations and companies have been operating for decades, right? There are years and often generations worth of experience in terms of, here's how my market will fluctuate. Like, here's when I'm expecting reservations to come in. Like, here's how things are shifting. And so I wholeheartedly believe that you have to pair that local knowledge and the operator knowledge with the data and revenue management tools, right? You need both to make sure your pricing and your units are being, adjusted correctly. One phrase we've used a ton, everybody's heard it, is set it and forget it. That's what you don't want to do, right? You don't want to leave your company's pricing and revenue strategy in the hands of a machine learning model that's 2 years old, right? And so use that, especially for like the little daily adjustments, but you've got to check in and make sure that your local knowledge and your own experience in the industry and with your specific properties and your specific market is kind of providing a check on that pricing system as well, and making sure it's doing the right thing and not just slashing rates by 20% when it shouldn't be. And people will start booking.
Yeah. And I remember a couple of years ago, or maybe like 3 years ago, the first data and revenue management conference that Amy Hinote put on, the one that was in Atlanta. Some folks from my market here in Myrtle Beach went, and their perception of it when they came back was, no way, I'm not putting my data, my rates in the hands of these companies that they're new. And I can't turn over the keys completely to that. And like you just said, and to your point, Annie, it's not about turning over the keys. It's about having access to the right information to help you with informed decisions. And we work closely with Wheelhouse, who is one of our sponsors of the show. And they, the way that they explain it is, like, you're in the driver's seat with the tool that you choose, and then you use key data to supplement that. But I think it's a good point, because I think there is still a lot of confusion between, well, I don't need both, I just need one. And that's not true.
No. And we work with a lot of these pricing companies as well. Like, it's so cool what they can do. And it, takes some of like the daily attention from a revenue manager professional out of it. So I don't want this to come off as they're not incredibly useful tools, but especially some of them you can, start setting those rules around like, okay, you need to drop your price if it's not booked 2 weeks out, or start jacking it up if X, Y, or Z is happening. And to create those rules, you need both like your historic experience within that market, but you also need some market level data that's coming directly from your competitors to help you figure out what those rules should be and where they should be set.
Yeah. And so we know you have a ton of data. So inquiring minds want to know, like, what kind of trends are you seeing in all that data right now?
Yeah, it's been an interesting readjustment in the US this season. So currently for Q1, we're pacing a little behind where we were last year. And that's continuing for the rest of the year. And so if we're looking at like year-over-year occupancy rates, last spring started off really good. Demand was high, supply was still a little lower. So most short-term rentals in the US were more occupied spring 2022 than they were spring 2021. Sometime around May and June, that started shifting. Demand stayed high. Plenty of people were still booking, but supply really started to take off.
Yeah.
We were seeing like 20% year-over-year increases in the number of vacation rentals available in the US. So more people were booking than in 2021, but they had more choices, more options to stay in. And then towards the fall, we started to see like a rebalancing of normal seasonal travel trends. So 2020, 2021, everybody was traveling during September, right? July and August were so booked. They were like, I don't want to pay those rates. It's going to be crazy, but I'm working from home. My kids are still remotely schooled. Like, let's take a nice September trip to the beach instead. And so that shoulder season occupancy was really high in a lot of destinations. So fall of last year, fall 2022, occupancy and seasonal trends started to come back down to kind of where they were pre-pandemic.
Right.
And since then, that's just kind of where it has seemed to balance out. There's a lot of indicators are pacing ahead of 2019, but behind the previous 2 years that were just like so amazing for short-term rental occupancy. So occupancy started to kind of come down a little bit, and we're seeing that through the next couple of quarters and through the summer as well. So obviously it's still really early to look at summer because so many markets have pretty short booking periods.
Right.
But in the US, just to put some numbers behind it, for June through August on the books as of yesterday when I pulled this data, we're at 18% occupied compared to 22% in 2022. So just, 4 or 5 percentage points behind, which is similar to what we saw during the first quarter of this year as well.
Now, have you seen a decline in the actual available units at all, or is that still high like it was last year?
It's still high like it was last year. We've seen supply growth is kind of like normalized this winter. It's kind of just stagnated. We're not seeing the huge explosion of units that we did from like May to September last year. It's hard to know. Some of that is normal, right? People are maybe listing their unit for peak summer. And then if they're choosing to, go back to just it's now their second home, or they're going to do a long-term rental, like they're going to wait until after the end of the summer season when they've made all their money and then take it off. What we haven't seen is like an explosion in new inventory the same way we were seeing during 2021 and 2022.
Yeah, interesting. It makes sense too, because I'm sure this coincides with real estate and everything that was going on, this time last year. I mean, this time last year, the first 2 quarters, real estate was just booming. So those people that were buying properties, they were immediately putting them up for rent. And, it's interesting when you look at the markets that you've put out some reports this week on LinkedIn on what markets are emerging and kind of surprising markets. I would say that they're not markets that are traditionally a vacation spot, but they're more urban, but they are probably just, is the data that you're reporting there, is it proportional to its own market? Or, it's not comparing that people are going to one of the cities, I think it was like Cincinnati or something. They're not going there more than they're going to a Myrtle Beach, but are you comparing it proportionally within that market?
So those were just the number of guest reservations for those markets year over year. It was not controlled for the amount of rentals. And so some of these, like the list you're referencing, had places like Tulsa, Oklahoma, Manhattan, New York was on there. That's obviously like a huge urban destination. places like Huntsville, Alabama. But those markets, we've kind of seen a turn towards some of them are more rural travel, right?
Mhm.
Maybe they're choosing like these less like typical leisure destinations, like a beach, and maybe they're going to like Lake of the Ozarks had huge explosive growth in 2021.
Mhm.
And so really these are just like the markets that had the most opportunity, the most room for growth. So it's not the most visitors, right? Orlando, Myrtle Beach, like some of these huge
They're still
destinations
going
will
to be
still
high. Yeah.
get the
Yeah.
biggest share of visitors, but they're already so popular. They're not going to see the same like year over year increases as some of those smaller markets will.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
I
makes
was
sense.
surprised to see some town I'd never heard of. I'm looking at the list right now. Bella Vista, Arkansas. I never even heard of that before. But the fact
Yeah.
that it was in the top 10, it was number 6. I mean, that's interesting. I mean, I think, Huntsville, Alabama, I can see that a lot of people go to like the Rocket Center
Mhm.
there, and Las Vegas. I mean, some of the cities like, okay, I can see some of it, but Old Orchard Beach, Maine, another one. Never heard of it
Oh, I
before,
love
but
Old Orchard Beach,
oh, see,
Maine.
somebody knows it. Okay.
It's
So
been a long time since I've been there, but yeah,
yeah.
it's a
So
great little
it is
town.
really interesting. And it's funny. So I grew up in the Arlington, Virginia area. So to see Alexandria on there, I'm like, well, they should always be good. But again, to the point, people
It's
were
not a
staying in
big, yeah.
hotels. It wasn't a vacation rental destination, but there were more available units that are up for rent that, 10 years ago, you would be hard pressed to find a rental in that
Yeah.
market.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then some of this is the dynamic of returning urban travel
Yeah.
as
Mhm.
well. So I was looking at markets that are doing well for summer, and where our professional managers are, it's these urban destinations like Denver and Philadelphia, that are pacing ahead of the previous year, like New York City. And you see some of those on that list of the top emerging spring break destinations as well, right? It's Manhattan, it's Las Vegas, Nevada, some of these markets that people were a little less keen to travel to in 2020 and
Yeah.
2021 are really starting to come back.
Mhm.
And then we are seeing some year-over-year declines, right? I just also wrote an article about Florida spring break. We're seeing some Florida markets struggling, not just the ones on the West Coast that were hit by Ian last fall, but some like age-old destinations like Orlando are not doing as well year over year as some of
Hmm.
these like newer emerging markets.
And what would
Interesting.
you tie that to? So Orlando
Yeah.
to me seems to be a situation of oversupply, and we don't have the international coming back in the like that's a market that in the state it's hyper dependent on international for a very large chunk. So to me that makes sense. But with the other markets, do you think it's pricing is too high? There is too much supply? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I tried to tie it into pricing, right? With the economic situation, we're all like, okay, well, maybe like the lower rate destinations are not doing as well as the luxury travelers that still have their money. That was not the case when I was looking at Florida spring break in particular. Orlando was more a case, and some of these like classic Florida markets like Panama City Beach, where they were pacing really well through like the 1st of February. And then it was the last minute reservations that people were expecting that stopped coming in.
Mm,
So they were looking great in January. I didn't check again, and then in February, I got a call from one of our partner success people, and she was like, "Melanie, help me! I don't know what's happening in Florida, but people are panicking." And it
mhm.
really was booking activity had stayed strong until it was the people who usually make a reservation 2 or 3 weeks in advance of spring break
Just
who are
didn't.
no longer making those reservations.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think some of it is probably those are lower rate stays being booked. Those are
Mhm.
people who weren't like, well, I booked this trip 6 months ago, so I'm definitely going. They were people who maybe their economic situation changed in the last month. They maybe had a little less disposable income, a little less cash on hand, and decided to not take that trip like they normally would.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and Panama City Beach, I mean, I can't speak for Myrtle Beach, but I feel like it's pretty similar. The people that do come here, the last minute ones, are those paycheck to paycheck kind of families. Like I got, I can do the beach this weekend, and they do wait till the last minute. So, in that, like, are you noticing any share shifts for markets? Like Panama City Beach to me in the Panhandle, Pensacola Beach or Fort Walton Beach would be similar. 30A, Destin, not so much. But are you seeing higher growth, say, over that direction towards the west, and maybe that's where they're going, or you maybe think they're just maybe going urban or not going anywhere?
Yeah, I think maybe they're not going anywhere this summer
Yeah.
or this spring. Places that had the longest booking window were doing the best because all of their reservations were in for spring break by like the end of December. And so they weren't as impacted by that downturn and kind of like the shorter booking window, booking activity that started happening in February and is still happening. So it was regardless of rate, of the average daily
Mm,
rate. Places like Anna Maria Island, like their spring break season looks excellent, but it's because it was already fully booked by like the end
right.
of December. So it was wild. One thing we are seeing, so for Q1, some places that are doing really well for the first quarter, a lot of these ski markets like Lake Tahoe,
Oh, ski season's been
yeah,
extended. Yeah.
yeah,
So
Park
yeah.
City had a great one. Like Hawaii is still just everybody's going to
Yeah.
Hawaii. Places in Q1 that had lower occupancy rates were places like the Maryland coast,
Mm,
the North Carolina coast, places where they benefited again from that crazy off-season activity. But now that it's back to normal, they're seeing year over year decline. So 2023 doesn't look as good as 2022, but it's just back to how things were pre-pandemic, where nobody's
yeah.
going to like the Outer Banks in January because it's not a fun place to be in January.
Yeah. I guess we all knew it was coming. It was just, the ride is over. We have to get back to what business as usual, I guess, to some degree.
Yeah. And it's tough, right? Because I think there's always the hope that that we'll continue to make a ton of money, the occupancy will stay high. And I know the people that our managers are struggling and our partners are struggling with the most is those first time or second time homeowners
Yeah.
who bought a house or
Mhm.
started listing in 2021, 2022. And so now that expectation is set that I'm going to make $80,000 during the summer on my 5-bedroom beachfront house. And
Right.
maybe now it's $65,000 instead of 80. And I know a lot of homeowners are like, what'd you do wrong? And the
Yeah,
Right.
reality is
exactly.
Yeah.
it's just market shifts. And so we're telling people
Yeah.
like, hey, share this market level data with your
Yeah.
homeowners, get out in
Mhm.
front of it, let them know that like you're doing everything you can to get these reservations and be competitive, but the market is different than it was a year ago.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we've been hearing and reporting on the podcast as well. That it's, this year aside, this always happens when it's a year that's a little bit down compared to the previous year. We've had, several even before COVID that it's like there's some years are just softer than others, and those are the years that homeowners start moving around, and not because their management company has done anything wrong, but they're going to think something's wrong if their revenue's down, and in lieu of having correct information or any information from the management company, they just assume that. And then they go start talking to other companies and they're going to say, oh, yeah, we'll do a better job for you. But it comes full circle that if you lose some homeowners that are making those decisions, if you haven't given them enough information to know that that's just the market, you're also going to gain some too. And that's just the nature of the business when there's a downturn. But it's a good opportunity to make sure you stay in front of your owners, because keep the ones that you have, and then you're still going to get those leads from the other ones that might not think that their rental company is doing so good. And you guys have great tools that managers can use to be able to, really visually show that they are the experts in that market to those owners.
Yeah. And if you're not the expert, like now's the time to step up and become that expert and figure out
Yeah.
what tools you need and what decisions you need to make and how to readjust some strategies to make sure that you're not letting your homeowners down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was on a panel just at VRMA, and we talked about the trends of 2023. And one point that came up that I've noticed now in my role at Costigo, as I'm talking to operators from all across the country, not just here in South Carolina, is that there's a lot of markets that still have not embraced dynamic pricing. And they're still kind of in that, old school mode of, this is how we set the rates, and we might manually apply some discounts here and there, but we definitely don't do any dynamic pricing. But and then there's been several, and some key markets in North Carolina and Florida that fall into that. But are you seeing that? And if you are they still using key data, but they're just kind of looking at it and they're just can't make the leap to doing dynamic pricing? Or are they not even looking at the data at all, would you say?
We're all over the place, right? We
Yeah.
have property managers who use the product once a month and make some decisions and then
Yeah.
check back in a month later. This is just representative of how the property management ecosystem works. There's also property managers who are in there every day, like multiple people at their company are spending multiple hours every day in the dashboard. I will say, like, our users tend to be on the more sophisticated end of that spectrum. That's where scrape data can be really useful to see those property managers who are not using a dynamic pricing tool. They're not using a business intelligence tool like Key Data Dashboard. And so they're probably not adjusting their prices as much, right? Like, that's a big blanket statement that there are a lot of people out there who don't use technology, but are still doing excellent jobs of managing their prices.
Yeah.
Right now, what we're seeing with prices is, yes, you'd be at the risk if you're only setting prices at the beginning of the season. You're saying, here's what happened in 2022. Here are my rates. Like, here's my brochure. They're posted, on a bulletin board somewhere. There's a huge problem that your rates could be too high right now because you were expecting another year-over-year increase, and not the situation that we currently have right now in a lot of U.S. leisure markets. We're also seeing a lot of management companies, they're holding prices high for the summer, and for booking periods, maybe like 60 to 90 days out. They're hoping that those reservations will come in, so they don't want to drop prices too early.
Right.
But right now, if we look at summer rates, they're still significantly higher than 2022 by maybe like $75 or so, on a national average. But everything we're hearing is people will drop those rates as we get closer to those statements.
If we were going to give property managers one tip for 2023, what would it be?
Yeah, everything I keep saying is your competition is back. Right?
I love that.
Yeah.
Way higher. Through last fall, we saw demand stay really high, but now demand's a little lower than last year. Even on the OTAs, fewer people are booking than they were this time last year. So Jason Sprinkle, our CEO, has always said, like, it's time to put your hands back on the wheel, right?
Yeah,
like, we cannot be in self-driving mode anymore. So it's time to adjust your rates to what's happening in your market for your types of inventory. Take a look at your marketing strategy, make sure that you're, back to maybe some email blast, make sure that you're like fine-tuned on the OTAs to get the type of customers that usually book with you. So it's time to start being competitive again, because both hotels are back, but then also vacation rental supply has increased so much in the past year that people have a plethora of choices, and you have to make sure that they're choosing to stay with you instead of somebody else.
Yeah. And I would say one other trend that I've noticed as I've talked to companies across the country this year is that there's a lot of companies that they don't do any guest marketing, which is crazy to me, because that's all I've ever really done is, I would say 95% of our efforts have been in guest marketing, but homeowner marketing too. But in the last couple of years, it's like that was kind of, guest marketing it became less important because Vrbo and Airbnb was just driving so much business, and especially to these new operators that they, didn't have the time or didn't really have the need, they thought, to be making, efforts on their own book direct strategies, or where that would come in down the line. But I think as we go into this year, those channels are going to be also still as competitive, or it's going to be more competitive on those channels. So to get more out of the bookings that you previously had, really digging into the names. Hopefully, if you've been collecting email addresses from those Vrbo and Airbnb guests when they check in, make sure that you are, developing that book direct strategy, and really, try and get those guests back with you. Show them the difference between the price when they book on those channels versus direct. But it's, I think this year is going to show a lot of those people why we've been preaching direct bookings if they hadn't currently, been doing them.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because if you look at the share of all bookings that are coming from like through direct sources versus Vrbo versus Airbnb, it's easy to say like, oh, Airbnb as a percentage of guests has gone up and direct as a percentage of guests has gone down. And that has happened in the last few years. But if you look at the number of reservations coming through those sources, like all of your people who book direct are still going to book direct with you. You're getting new guests from the OTAs who may not know they don't even know you have a website and that they can get a cheaper rate if they book with you directly. and not on the OTA. So there's so much like renter education to be done about like, okay, well, when you come back, here's our website. You'll get, you know, a slightly discounted rate over booking on Airbnb. Like, we'd love to have your return business.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
think that's where the technology comes into play, because we got so hands off as an industry, like don't see the guest, don't touch the guest, don't feel the guest, like nothing. But in order for you to get the guest back, you have to be able to capture that information. So there's like some great pieces of great tools out there that you can use within your rental. I'm curious, beyond trends, like what are the things on tap for Key Data? I've been talking to Jason about some stuff that he's going to test out for me, and we've been talking about some things that I personally need for my organization, and he's been, you know, thinking about ways to do it. But I know you guys are constantly like thinking and iterating and really putting out some incredible tools for partners to use. But is there anything big on the horizon that's coming out in the next, you know, before season, I guess?
What we put out super recently that everybody should go check out is there's a new pickup report that's part of the core product and helps you understand like where your pickup is coming. Is one of those like you could work your way into it in the dashboard, but it's so nice to just have it in one place for pickup reporting at both like your property level and then your company level as well. So that's a huge one.
That. Yeah.
There's a new host product that has officially launched that for those smaller people, maybe people who don't have a property management system. I don't know if they're your listeners, but we do have a host product that has some super incredible market insights. So that's out and it's constantly being fine-tuned. We're also doing some super fun things. So I work closely, this is where I get excited, with our data scientists and data engineers, right?
Yeah.
We meet on a weekly basis. They're just doing some incredible work around things like rental projections. So you can have a better understanding of what a potential property would make. They're working heavily with our scrape data set, our Airbnb and Vrbo data, and using our direct data to inform that data to make sure it's reliable. And it's going to give us, you know, way more like national coverage. And again, making sure we're capturing those rental by owners, the hosts, and then also the smaller or maybe less sophisticated property managers who are not using the Key Data dashboard.
Interesting. What about companies that have properties in multiple markets? Are they still able to see multiple markets within the dashboard?
Oh yeah. My team is also responsible for a lot of the mapping that goes into our product. So that's actually my first year or so at the company was like, let's map out all of these vacation areas and destinations around the world. And then obviously heavily in the US where we have a ton of customers. And so in a lot of markets, they can go into their dashboard and they can click on their specific condo building. If they're somewhere like Myrtle Beach or Gulf Shores that has a ton of condos. And then if we don't have enough direct customers, they can now see scrape data benchmarking. So even for your specific building where your rental unit is, you can benchmark to other units in that building, which is wild. And then multi-region companies, we've always had good solutions for. They can filter down to their entire company or a specific region, a specific market, or on a state or county level. And that's super important, right? You right now, especially, you don't want to, like we said earlier, you don't want to be including your Lake Tahoe rentals and your North Carolina coast rentals in the same reporting because they're behaving totally different.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the newer investors or short-term rental owners that have come into the space in the last couple of years, a lot of them have taken that approach that they are trying to have one property here, one property there. And I think this is going to be a very interesting year for them to see the differences between the markets. But we'll see. I hope that I hope that they can make it work. But I think we've seen a lot of movement on that side that makes me a little bit nervous. You know, I think there's a reason why so few large vacation rental companies exist in multiple markets, because the complexity, you know, of operating in those areas. But doing one listing here and there, you know, perhaps that might be a strategy, but to be able to compare the data is going to be big for them this year.
Yeah,
I had one last question going back to the earlier about hotels. So are you seeing hotels being interested in using Key Data, or are they just looking at, they just want to be able to access the data? Like, so are they fundamentally using it, or is it just access to the overall data from a market standpoint?
It really depends. If it's like a regional hotel or B&B or resort in a leisure destination, like we have integrations with systems like Opera, and they love working with us because we're a little closer to their level of reporting. Their competitive set is short-term rentals in their market. So we do have a lot of customers that are hotels. On the chain side of things, like multi-region chains, usually they're just interested in the vacation rental performance data, right? They have another system that does all their reporting for them and their business intelligence. But what they want to know is, okay, how are the short-term rentals in my destination behaving?
Yeah.
Mhm.
It is kind of I don't know, kind of satisfying to finally see the hotels like want to look and see
Yeah,
what
wanting to have
we're all
it.
doing.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
Well,
it kind of feels good, but I guess we'll see where that goes. But Melanie, thank you so much for joining us, and I think we'd love to have you back like in the fall and do a recap of what the summer looked like. I think that would be really telling and interesting. But if anybody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to reach you?
I'd say go to our website. It's just keydatadashboard.com. My team does a lot of writing about trends in the space. We may have written something about your market, so check out our blog. And then we're on LinkedIn as well and post a lot there.
Awesome. Thank you. We will include that in our show notes. And if anybody wants to contact Annie and I, you can go to alexandanniepodcast.com. Until next time, thank you for tuning in, everyone.